What's going on, all you wonderful A-plusers out there? It is I, Stuart, here once again with another Stargirl review. That's right, we're talking today about Season 3, Episode number 5. I believe it was called The Thief this time. And, I think the reason I kind of skipped last week's episode was because, not a lot really happened in terms of plot, which I feel like I've been saying a lot about that during this season. And that's, again, it kind of comes down to the fact that this season is a murder mystery. And when you're basically spreading a murder mystery out through the course of 13 episodes, some episodes are going to be a lot slower than others. Now, I wouldn't say the last two episodes like this one and then episode 4 were filler per se. They definitely weren't filler, but they were just the amount of things that that actually happen in terms of moving the plot itself forward was just kind of just really small, to the point where just kind of these episodes start to feel a little bit padded out at times. So I just kind of figured it might be easier to tackle these two episodes together, even though mostly I'm going to be talking about episode number 5 and only a little bit about episode number 4. In fact, I'll just kind of get episode 4 out of the way first before I get into episode 5, just so, we're all kind of caught up and on the same page. But basically in episode 4, Silvester turns out to be just fine, but he doesn't know who attacked him. We get a little more insight as to into the crime scene. We find that there's a blood sample there, and that the blood sample is a very unique kind of blood cell because it belongs to that of Dragon King, or so we're led to believe. But by the end of the episode, we find out that Cindy's condition is a lot worse than we were originally led on to believe. So we discovered that there's basically a lot more evidence to suggest that Cindy actually was the one to kill the gambler, and that plays out in this episode too. Even though, like I said, when you look at the fact that this is a TV show and that Cindy being the one to kill the gambler would be the most boring answer they could possibly give us, I'm still kind of going with the assumption that Cindy did not do it, but obviously that's coming from the perspective of a viewer, someone watching the show, knowing that the answer has to be something a lot more unique than that. But if I was living in that world, the world of Stargirl, yeah, Cindy would be my number one suspect for sure. But again, I'm talking through the perspective of a viewer. So again, not too much really happened last episode, and the same is kind of with this episode. Again, not much happened, but that's not to say either episode was really bad. It just means that again, going back to the murder mystery aspect of this through the course of 13 episodes, it's a lot harder to review each episode individually when things that I might be more judgmental on might make more sense later on down the line. And that's kind of the challenge with reviewing a show like this, is I don't want to be overly critical on something because at the moment when I first see it, I'm like, oh, well, this is dumb, this doesn't make any sense. But then 7 episodes later, there might be an explanation for that, and I might be like, well, I take that back. Things like that is what I'm always trying to be careful of. So if I do anything like that in this episode, if I say something that I don't like that later on down the line, they end up addressing, and I'm like, oh wait, this actually makes more sense with more context, just be aware that might happen, and I apologize if that does. I do try really hard to keep as open of a mind when it comes to that kind of stuff when reviewing these episodes individually, but that all being said, overall I thought episode 4 was another decent episode, and episode 5 another decent episode. But again, we'll get a little more specific with episode 5. This is really what most of the review is. With episode 4, this is more of a catch-up review since I didn't do it last week for episode 4, but this is really more of a review for episode 5, so let's get into it, everyone. So the episode, of course, starts out with Cindy over the gambler's body with another flashback, and we see that her shivs are out, and it's almost like the showrunners really want us to think that she's the one who did it. And again, kind of going back to the fact that would be the most boring answer, I think it's safe to say we're all on the same page when we all think that, yeah, there's no way she actually did kill the gambler. However, there is a lot more to suggest that she might know who did it, or at least at the very least, when she arrived at the scene of the crime, she had to know that there was still danger in the area, because she was definitely in a very ready to fight kind of position. Although you could say that because maybe she saw a dead body, and regardless, no matter what, if you see a dead body, you're not exactly going to keep your guard down. But her shivs are basically out, which gives us way more evidence that it had to to have been her that killed the gambler. But of course, you know, again, going with the whole TV writing type of thing, I don't think that's the case. However, we do see that she does notice that the laptop is near the gambler right as the team is about to arrive to the crime scene, and her instinct is to hide the laptop. And we still don't know 100% why it is that she is doing her own thing with the laptop and not telling her teammates about it. But at this point, I think it's probably got something to do with some evidence against her, or just something on that laptop about her that she really doesn't want her teammates to find out. And so I think that's kind of the main reason she's keeping the laptop to herself, and I'm sure we're going to get an explanation for that sometime down the line. We then cut to Courtney and Cameron, and it looks like things are going pretty well for them as we finally get like a kiss between the two of them. Although I think we got one in the previous episode, but this was like not just like kind of a peck kind of kiss. This was like actually like a long drawn out kind of romantic type of kiss with the 360 camera and all that kind of stuff. You know, so everything's looking up. But when she gets in, Pat shows a little bit of concern because he's starting to notice that, you know, it's almost like she's kind of growing out of the JSA. You know, she feels like he feels like she's really just like kind of not really focused as much as she used to be on being Stargirl. And this just kind of concerns Pat because, you know, ever since the two of them moved together, ever since the family moved to Blue Valley, you know, that was like kind of Courtney's biggest obsession, was becoming Stargirl. So, you know, it's not that Pat is against her, you know, doing her own thing, having her own life. It just, you know, it's just a small concern that he has, which, you know, of course we'll get a little more into later on. But we do find out that one thing Courtney is trying to do is she's going through the JSA files and she's looking for Icicle's profile so she can see if there's anything about him that he can use to basically help his son Cameron into learning how to control his powers a little bit better. The major thing that I didn't like in the episode was we go back to Sydney trying to hack into the laptop, and we had previously spent about 4 episodes of her trying to access certain data but not knowing what the password was to get onto that. And we then suddenly find out that she has the gambler's device that allows him to hack literally into anything. And she's had this device with her the whole time, so you kind of wonder why she didn't use it before. And I kept thinking, you know, did I miss something? Like, I had to have missed something. Like, maybe this was something she didn't acquire until the previous episode. So I looked at other YouTube reviews of this episode, and no, I don't think that's the case, because they're all bringing up the same thing, which is that she didn't have this before. So I think this is probably the one thing in the episode I didn't like at all, is the fact that she had this whole time, but she's not using it until just now. And it kind of comes off as, well, we just need to move the plot forward in some way, and we're too lazy to come up with a better explanation of how she could have accessed, you know, the password. Like, it couldn't have been a simple note that she only just found until that episode. You know how like people leave notes with the password to the Wi-Fi or the password to their computer around, like somewhere in the desk. It couldn't have been something like that, you know, which I would have accepted, but nope, it had to be a device that she had with her the whole time. And that's kind of what annoyed me about that moment, is just like, well, why didn't you do this early on? So but she does have access to this, so things are kind of looking up for her for now. However, we're definitely going to come back to this point at the very end of the episode. We also see that the JSA are on their way to that exact area that she's in, because they have decided to explore the tunnels, because of course at this point they still think the Dragon King might be alive. And Sydney gets access to the cameras that we were pretty sure are installed by Mr. Bones. So it leads me to kind of wonder if Mr. Bones like also is like low-key trying to help Sydney, but for his own selfish reasons, if that makes sense. Like he currently it's his best interest at the moment that Sydney remains on the JSA. For what reason, I have no idea, but I mean, just the footage of her finding out that everyone's coming towards her like really fast, like maybe she had her own system set up for that exact purpose. But as far as I could tell in the episode, it almost looked like that footage was sent to her by Mr. Bones, but again, it's kind of hard to say for now. But we do get Pat and, Rick and Yolanda as they arrive into the ISA headquarters. And the scene that we get from the trailer is we see that Starman gets, really mad when they get into the lair, but we don't really see why. And here we get the context, and the context doesn't really make it that much better. In fact, I was trying not to say anything earlier, but the more this show kind of goes on, the more it kind of feels like Joel McHale, I think that's his name, Starman. It kind of feels like he's not invested in the show. And I say that because a lot of his anger scenes, which they write a lot for him, I feel like that's when his acting is like at his worst, is when he's trying to be angry. And it's like it feels at times like he's trying too hard, or not hard enough. I don't know. It's like this weird mixture where it's like he has the volume there, but it's like he's really not going all out with the anger. And it just doesn't feel as genuine as I wish it did, which is weird because looking at season 2, when he wasn't a regular on the show, I feel like his acting was like, top level, like really, really good at times, especially during his more serious moments. But here, it's like the only time I really enjoy his acting is when he's in his comfort zone doing comedy, when he's like, being witty and funny as Silvester. But here, whenever he's trying to be serious and angry, I don't know, I feel like it doesn't work the same way as it did in season 2, and it kind of comes off like the actor himself just doesn't want to be there as a full-time. Like it almost feels like he preferred being like a guest star instead of being like a full-time, cast member, if that makes sense. But I don't know, maybe it's just me. What do you guys think of his acting? Definitely let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm sure other people probably don't have a problem with it, but yeah, there's just something about like his anger that just doesn't feel genuine to me personally. But regardless, he loses his temper once they get to the ISA headquarters, simply because he's in the ISA headquarters and he sees a photo of the ISA, and it kind of triggers, to an extent, I guess you could say, some PTSD from him. So he loses his temper in front of the kids and feels really bad about it the next morning. Now, I gotta say, the scene transition from the ISA headquarters to him suddenly waking up in his bed and then polishing silverware was a bit weird. Like, there was a brief moment where I actually thought we were watching a flashback and I didn't realize we were watching a continuation of the previous scene. But regardless, what we have is basically Barbara kind of telling him that, like, it's okay that he lost, or not necessarily that it's okay that he lost his temper, but it's okay that he made a mistake, and that there's, always time to learn from it and, help the kids essentially learn from his own mistakes too. So what we get from here on out is kind of him mentoring each of the kids individually, which is something about the episode that I actually really do like. Now, whether or not he's a good mentor to these kids, I can see people debating all they want, but what you can't really argue though is that at least he's putting in the effort and he's trying to kind of help them out and he's trying to be there. So the first kid we kind of get a little interaction with was Mike, and it's essentially Mike kind of telling him how he feels very left out of the JSA, and Starman kind of just tells him that, when he first became a superhero, it was the same thing. No one ever took him seriously, so he had to essentially prove to the world that he could be taken seriously, that he could be the Starman that everyone thought he could be, or that he knew he could be, essentially. And later on, I'm going to do the Mike and Jakeem side plot first, just because it's a very small portion of the episode. But later on, Key and Jakeem basically want to explore the tunnels, but of course neither one of them are really capable of defending themselves if things go wrong. So when they see Sydney kind of standing up for them when it comes to them being like harassed by these bullies, they think maybe the best option would be to get Sydney to go down to the tunnels with them. But of course that goes about as well as you would expect, as she then kind of makes fun of the two of them and walks away. What I do like is the implication that Mike actually might have a crush on her, which I kind of found absolutely hilarious. But kind of a funny gag in the episode. I've been enjoying the Mike and Jakeem stuff for the most part. I do hope they give them a little bit more to do later on, because now it just becomes a little bit of, hey, we should do something, and we should do something. Should we do something? Yeah, let's do something, and nothing really happens. And I mean, it's funny the first 3 times, but now that we've hit that rule of 3, I really hope we don't just get that pattern repeated for a 4th time. I hope, like, if we get this again, there's at the very least like a punchline, or maybe we actually do get to see them do something. Just don't drag this gag on for a 4th time is all I'm saying. We then cut to Beth in the middle of class when she gets a call on the goggles from Starman. A small thing I'll kind of nitpick about the scene is that, she's whispering to Starman on her goggles, and for some reason we only really see like one, maybe two students in the classroom notice her. The teacher doesn't like notice that she's putting on weird goggles in the middle of a class, and actually I just realized I didn't even get into why Starman is calling her, but essentially Starman arrives at a base, and I just realized I don't think I took a photo of it, but he basically needs her to hack into this base, and it's a lair of the Dragon King, and so he is exploring all the abandoned labs that the Dragon King has spread throughout the United States. So he tries to get Beth to unlock it for him. It works, but unfortunately Beth discovers that the goggles are also helping her cheat on the test, which she doesn't like to do because, of course, she's not a cheater, so she immediately kind of feels guilty about it, even though she could just take the goggles off immediately afterwards, or just, close her eyes and not look at the answers being given to her. But it's a funny gag regardless, and what we get then is Starman kind of exploring the lab abandoned by the Dragon King, and we don't really get much after that. Like, the scene is presented like something bad is going to happen, but nothing really happens. We see that there's a weasel-looking lizard of some sort. Like, it didn't look like a real lizard of any kind. It looked like it was a fictional lizard, for this show that could only exist in the DC universe. But maybe I'm wrong, or hell, maybe it's a baby dragon. But of course, you have Starman making a joke about it. But we really don't get much after that. But we then cut to a diner where we got Pat and Barbara on a date, and of course the Crocs kind of join. And here we get a little more information about the gambler and a little more evidence to suggest that the gambler was really trying to turn a new leaf, because it turns out the Crocs are actually doing their own investigation, which Pat doesn't seem too happy with, because again, when it comes to the Crocs, he doesn't really trust them as much as Courtney does. However, I feel like Barbara seems to be coming around due to the friendship she's been getting with Tigress specifically. In fact, there's actually kind of one moment I thought that was kind of funny where, Crusher was like claiming that essentially they were interrogating the witnesses by holding them over, a building and basically threatening to drop them. But Tigress kind of like shakes her head, kind of implying that's not actually what happened. He's just trying to sound really tough. So I would be kind of curious to see more of this kind of going forward. And I really kind of do hope that Pat eventually kind of turns around, because I get why he wouldn't exactly want to become best friends with Crusher or anything like that, but I do think that there is potential there. The moment that Pat kind of realizes that maybe he can't fully trust the Crocs, or maybe it is good to keep his guard up around them, but at the very least he knows that they're not the threat that they used to be, and that he can, maybe a friendship could open up there. And then, of course, Crusher himself has to learn not to push this thing, because I feel like that's kind of the other thing, is that, you can definitely get this idea that Crusher really wants to have a friendship with Pat, but it's very one-sided, because he's not letting Pat kind of come to him. It's basically he's kind of intruding Pat's personal space the entire time, making it a very one-sided friendship at the moment. The same thing kind of happened between Barbara and Tigress, but with Tigress, she wasn't necessarily constantly invading Barbara's workspace. She was just kind of visiting her, and that was basically kind of the extent to it. But anyways, going to the next scene, one thing we get that I found kind of interesting was we get Courtney essentially talking to Cindy about Cameron, and I do kind of like that Cindy's the one that she came to about this, because at this point the JSA still don't trust Cameron for reasons that I'll get into actually my thoughts on this when we get to that scene. But Cindy seemingly is very happy for Courtney, and tells her that she could definitely see the two of them working as a couple, but she also warns Courtney not to essentially tell Cameron about her father, saying that no child should ever have to have a bad image of their father like that. And it again kind of brings me back to my theory on why I think Pat might have been the one to kill the gambler, and why I think Cindy knows about this, because what she says right there, I feel like one thing Sydney doesn't want to do, she doesn't want Courtney to hurt the same way she did when she found out that her dad not only wasn't Starman, but her dad was an absolute piece of shit, which is something that kind of comes up in this scene, in fact. So if Sydney knows that Pat was the one who killed the gambler, she also would know that that is something that would absolutely devastate Courtney. So I feel like if my theory does pan out, and Pat killed the gambler and Sydney knows about this scene kind of really adds to that idea, and it kind of gives a lot of reason of why it is that, you know, even though she knows who did it, it also kind of adds to the idea of why she's trying to cover it up. So the very next scene, we got our JSA meeting during school, and Cameron, of course, not knowing that it's a JSA meeting, goes to say hi to Courtney, and this is where we get Rick basically being a complete asshole to Cameron, kind of the same way we've been seeing in the show previously. And here we finally get like a weird implication that has technically crossed my line before, or it's crossed my mind before, but I never really wanted to get into it because I wanted to wait to see how they fleshed out his character later on going forward before I said anything about this matter, because when it comes to high school dramas, especially that on the CW, it's really hard to know what their intention is when it comes to the quiet brooding characters, what their intended writing purposes with those type of characters are. But I think I did finally figure it out with Cameron, and again, I had my suspicions beforehand, but I wanted to wait until I could kind of piece together more about like his history with the other characters in the show, you know, before Courtney, of course, moved into Blue Valley. And here's what it is. I think Cameron might be on the spectrum, but the thing is, because he doesn't look like he's on the spectrum, I think it gives people this idea of him just being like not a good person and just being an absolute psychopath, when that is clearly not the case from everything that we've seen from him before. And then there's another scene after this that kind of adds to that, but essentially, like, here's what kind of bothers me about the scene, but not in a bothering way like bad writing, but like bothers me as in like in a good way, I guess you could say, because this is a very it's a high school drama, so therefore characters say things that are really stupid, but it's also things that you could see high schoolers saying in real life. But that's essentially like, the JSA have a right to be annoyed with Courtney because she's clearly not in the game. Her head's not in the game. She's thinking about Cameron way too much when she should be focusing on the murder mystery. However, no one really criticizes her for that specifically, except for, you know, Beth. When it comes to Yolanda and Rick, they're just mad at her for having a boy. Like, Yolanda's mad at her for having a boyfriend, and Rick's mad at her because he just doesn't think that Cameron's a good person. He thinks that Cameron is just as evil as his father. And they don't articulate these points to her, and she doesn't articulate, you know, the fact that Cameron has powers and she's trying to help him to them. I mean, for two reasons. Again, going to the high school aspect about this, you know, being that high schoolers really don't communicate the way they should a lot of times with their closest friends, but also kind of go into the idea that it's not really her secret to tell. If Cameron wants them to know about his powers, he'll tell them about his powers, that kind of a thing. So I feel like because it's not her secret to tell, she doesn't want to tell them about it. And it just kind of creates like this friction between them. And it kind of leads me to think that the team may later on actually choose Starman over her, you know. Like, I'm not going to say, like, obviously the show is still called Stargirl, so I'm not trying to say that, you know, Starman is going to replace her, but there might be a period of time, where the team has to choose between Starman and Stargirl, like for an episode or two. And I think if Courtney keeps going on this path and the team chooses to keep hating her for going down this path, I feel like the team may actually choose Starman when that moment comes. But yeah, then we get to Sydney kind of interrogating Cameron, trying to figure out, you know, whether or not he's really boyfriend material for her BFF. So she then brings up his past, and this kind of goes back to the idea I had of him being on the spectrum. And we find out that as a kid, he used to love breaking things. And this is where he was sent to kind of an art camp that was also like used as an institution for kids that liked breaking things. Basically, it was a way to help kids essentially express themselves through a more healthy manner than just, breaking things. And so this is where it's implied that he learned that art was the best way to kind of express himself, or, let out his emotions, I guess you could say. But yeah, regardless, she brings this up in a way that's just like, it's not a way of concern. It's like she's literally just trying to hurt him. She even brings up his dead mother. And, we see that obviously his powers start kind of manifesting, and, he's trying to keep him under control. And he just kind of says, I don't know why you're trying to hurt me, but this just proves you haven't changed. And we'll come back to this a bit later on. And I do like that Starman is actually kind of standing up for Courtney when the team tells him about this. He's kind of like, well, sounds like you guys all just kind of ganged up on her. And I do like this because even though Starman is trying to essentially be a good mentor to them, he's also going to call them out when they mess up. And this was definitely a moment where they all kind of messed up. I mean, again, I feel like there's blame to go around because I'm not trying to say Courtney is fully innocent either, because, she is the problem with relationships in high school is that they really can be very distracting. I know from experience that, when I started dating in high school, my focus when it came to my extracurricular activities such as football and wrestling, I definitely wasn't as committed as I could have been. My skills weren't as good as they could have been. And that's just how it goes when it comes to dating in high school. So the team is starting to notice that. And so therefore, because Courtney's not in it, especially, this isn't a high school sport. This is a murder that they're trying to solve. So it's something a lot more serious. And because she's not in it 100%, the team is understandably frustrated. But that all being said, I do like that, Starman tries not to take sides, but he does try to remind them that they're all a team essentially. We then get a moment between Sydney and Courtney, and this is where Sydney finds out that Courtney knows about his powers, and that's what she's been trying to do, is help Cameron learn how to control them better. But we also have Sydney letting Courtney know about Cameron's grandmother, that she also has these powers as well. But whether or not Sydney knows that that his grandparents know about the ISA. Sorry, I just hiccuped there for a minute. But I guess it's kind of unclear how much she knows, basically, about Cameron's family. So, and I say this because it's kind of weird to me that, Courtney clearly knows where Cameron's powers come from. She clearly knows that that Cameron lives with his grandparents. So it's weird to me that she's later on okay with being in his house with his grandparents, knowing that his grandparents probably have it out for her. Unless they don't know about the final battle from season 1, which I find really hard to believe. I guess technically we still don't 100% know how much, Cameron's grandparents actually know about what happened, but I think it's safe to assume they at the very least know that Icicle was killed by the JSA, and whether or not they know Courtney is part of that JSA, I guess we'll have to wait and see later on. Maybe it was explained in season 1. It's hard to say because it's been a minute since I've watched season 1, but as far as I can remember, there's nothing about them being 100% in on the loop. They obviously knew about the project that Icicle was doing that was supposed to brainwash America, but we don't know how much they know beyond that. So we then get to Rick Tyler, who's working on fixing the hourglass again, and Starman brings up I can't remember what he called it, which is sad because it's like an easy name. I believe it was the limiter. He brings up the limiter within the hourglass, saying that maybe that's the reason that it's not working, but he also mentions to not take it out or not do anything stupid because it's in the hourglass for a reason. But of course, Rick ignores this advice, takes the limiter out, uses the hourglass, and we don't know what kind of long-term effects this is going to have, but what I think might end up happening is that he's going to have this strength with him even when he doesn't want it, meaning that, something as simple as, maybe a fight in the schoolyard could end up having really bad consequences going forward. So we'll have to wait and see what actually happens here. But I feel like, yeah, because we had that warning from Starman that the limiter was there for a reason, I feel like Rick might have this strength without realizing it, and he's going to hurt someone really badly on accident. But it's hard to say for sure. I just know that nothing good can come out of having this type of strength suddenly, all the time, when originally you were so used to only having it when you needed it. You know what I mean? But we then get a scene with Beth and her parents. Now, earlier, this was something I didn't bring up, but essentially, we get a little bit more Beth's parents trying to be involved, but like Starman kind of warns Beth that it may not be the best idea because when his sister got involved, that's what ended up getting her killed by Brainwave, essentially. Even though, I guess maybe that's not what got her killed by Brainwave, because she was married to Brainwave, so who knows, maybe if she didn't know about Silvester being Starman, she might have married Brainwave anyways. It's hard to say, we don't know the full history, but regardless, Beth doesn't feel comfortable with her parents being involved, so she asks them, pretty politely just not to be involved. And what I do like, and I find kind of interesting is, and I think it just comes to the fact that like her parents know how gifted she is and how important she is to the JSA, so I think this is why that they're okay with it. But it is kind of interesting that she reminds them how dangerous being a superhero is and how people die, and her parents are still totally fine with her doing it, and they even respect her wishes seemingly to back off and leave her alone. Now, I don't think this is gonna last. I think that sometime during the season finale, she's gonna realize that maybe actually she does need her parents, and so they end up helping in some kind of small way. But I think like the problem with how they're trying to go about helping her is that they're essentially trying to push themselves into her life instead of just like kind of like waiting for an opportunity for her to like come to them, like letting them know that that she needs them. One thing I also kind of find interesting is like the previous 2 seasons, you have Beth trying to be really close to her parents, but of course her parents being really busy. So it almost is kind of sad, that you get this moment, and it reminds me of a line from one of my favorite movies, Hook, which is the idea that, when our kids are young, they crave our attention, and then when they grow up, we crave their attention. So it really kind of comes down to how much you utilize the time for when the kids really want your attention, how you utilize it. And I feel like there might be some regret with Beth's parents because they're starting to realize that they hadn't been utilizing that time the way they probably should have for family time and things like that. So there's almost like a bit of regret from the two of them because of this, it feels like. But again, we'll have to see how that kind of plays out later on. But then we get to Shiv going to the same dragon lair that Starman was investigating earlier, and again seemingly nothing happens, and it feels like we're just watching a filler scene to let us know that the Dragon King has different lairs scattered throughout the United States, because again we don't really see her or Starman find anything in this area. So I'm not 100% sure what the purpose was for these scenes, but I guess we'll have to wait and see later on. But then we cut back to Courtney with Cameron, and this is what I brought up earlier, that she seemingly knows now that Cameron's mother, or grandmother I should say, is evil, but she's totally okay with being in their house. And I don't know, if I was Courtney, I think I'd be that kind of person that would be like, hey, instead of hanging out at your place, how about we hang out at my place, my parents aren't evil. I don't know. But again, we don't know exactly how much her his grandparents know, but I guess that's something we'll have to wait and see later on. But then finally we get Wildcat, and this kind of comes back to Starman again trying to be a mentor to all the kids, and basically telling Yolanda that if she really thinks Sydney is guilty, that she should follow that hunch and do her own investigation. So she does. She breaks into Sydney's house, and she eventually finds the gambler's laptop, and that's where we end the episode. Oops, I ended up hitting stop recording when I meant to just lower the images here. But again, not a bad episode. Another really good episode. But I think, again, in terms of the overall plot, not very much really happened. The only thing that kind of really happened that really moved things forward was Yolanda finding the laptop, and that was at the very end of the episode. Now, again, story-wise, there was plenty. We got we get friction between the JSA, especially now with Courtney seemingly prioritizing Cameron over the JSA. We have the fact that not everyone is being 100% honest with each other, which makes sense because, again, this is a high school drama, and high schoolers, let's face it, high schoolers aren't the most honest people out there. Let's be honest, But overall, not a bad episode. I feel like the season overall hasn't been my favorite, but it hasn't been bad. It's been going at a very steady pace, I guess you could say, where it's like every episode we get very little kind of added to the overall mystery. So there's people like me trying to solve this mystery before we really have that much evidence, and I don't know. I kind of wish there was just a little bit more, is all I'm saying. Not bad. I just wish we had a little something more to know what we have to look forward to later on down the line. But that's just me personally. But again, overall, not bad. But at the end of the day, of course, these are just my A+ opinions. We here at A+ Opinions always want to know what you guys think. So definitely let me know your thoughts on the episode in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel. But of course, guys, above all, don't forget to keep it A+, and I will catch you guys later.